Magandang umaga. Walang Diyos dito sa Pilipinas. Walang, did I say it right? Walang Diyos dito sa Pilipinas. That could make a song, huh? Walang Diyos dito sa Pilipinas. Somebody should write it. Make a new national anthem for the country. Well, thank all of you for hosting this wonderful event. It's incredible to be a part of history like this. It's honoring, it's exciting. As I'm sitting there listening to everybody speak, I'm thinking, this is history. This is real. This is happening right now, and there's no going back. This is my first visit to the Philippines, and I've always wanted to come here. I've always had images of what it's like, and now I know how nice of a country it is. As I was landing yesterday, the plane was coming in, I was looking out the window, and I was thinking back at other visitors to this country, the original, from Malaysia, right, the Malay people originally, and then the Muslims came, and then Magellan came, and that worked out pretty good. And then they took revenge. Legazpi, was that his name? Legazpi came, and he gave all you local Filipinos a wonderful choice, the same choice that my ancestors had. My family is American Indian. When the Europeans came over to our continent with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other, or a sword in the other. So you have a choice, he said. You can convert or you can die. The choice is yours. You are free to make up your own mind. So, and then the Japanese came, the Americans came with mixed results. I'm proud of being an American, but I'm not always proud of everything America has done in this world. But it's a big world. It's a global world. So thank all of you, and thank you other speakers. Thank you, Norm, for that great talk. Norm and I were in Cameroon together. I was just looking at photographs of us in Africa, and I actually think, Norm, that the Catholic Church does have a consequentialist ethics. I think they consider the consequences of actions. For example, the health bill that's going to be debated, the Catholic Church realizes the consequences that as birth control increases, the number of altar boys decreases. Have you thought about that? Where are all the children going to come from if the mothers are using birth control? In my country, more than 90% of Roman Catholics disagree with the Vatican. They are smarter than the Church. They are smarter than the Pope. They are kinder than their religion, and they practice birth control because they know that what is good for the children that they do have. So that's one example where the Church and religion should not be mixed. If you want to have a little religious idea, if you don't want to use birth control for yourself, that's fine. That's freedom. But don't force everybody else to follow your particular little religious ideas. Now, my Indian tribe that I come from had a belief, we don't anymore, that if somebody took your photograph, it would steal your soul. Did you know that? Well, today I think I am totally soulless here. There's nothing left in the soul. My tribe is a very intelligent tribe. The Lenape Tribe of American Indians, we are the tribe that sold Manhattan to the Dutch for $24. Was that a smart bargain? Not only that, but we had to leave Manhattan. We had to get out of Manhattan. We had 7 forced migrations where we ended up in Oklahoma, clear across the country, where my grandfather was born on Indian territory. And it's interesting, and the eastern tribes, in the woodland tribes, were a little fair skinned, not quite as dark as the more western tribes. And my mother happened to have a Swedish father, so I'm a sweet Indian is what I am. So, but we are all members of the tribe, and the tribal seal of our tribe, the Lenape, the Delaware Indians is what the government calls us. It has the 3 clans. It has the turkey foot. It has the wolf print, and then it has the turtle. My clan is the turtle clan of the Lenape tribe. But On the top of that, there's a Christian cross. On a tribal seal of American Indian, of a native indigenous people, there's a Christian cross. And I don't know how it got there. Nobody knows. I've asked the tribe, how did that cross get on there? And they said, we don't know. Was there ever a vote? We don't know. They said, somebody said, well, most Indians are Christians. You know, they become Christianized. Of course, they had to. We almost went extinct. We became Christianized by the loving invaders who brought their religion over. Look what they did in Africa. You know, we were down looking at the consequences of colonialism in different parts of the world, and look what has happened here. So I can't say Catholicism is all bad, actually, because I got this in the mail. Can you see what that is? This is a card for Our Lady of Lourdes, Pray for Us. The Freedom from Religion Foundation took a full-page ad out in the New York Times a couple of months ago saying an open letter to liberal Catholics. It's time to quit the Catholic Church. It was a full-page ad. It was very expensive, but a lot of people supported the ad. And then the letter was saying, look, you're smarter than your church. You're better than your church. Why are you supporting this organization that you don't believe in anymore? And it went on to say many other things. Do you support women and their rights or the bishops and their wrongs? And we ended it by saying, it's time to exit en masse. So we got a lot of letters, you can imagine, a lot of phone calls. We are in Madison, Wisconsin, but people all over the country were calling us either to praise us and thank us and join the foundation, or you can imagine some of the other responses we got. Just about a month ago, we received in the mail an envelope with human feces in it. And we like to say we get a lot of religious shit at our organization, but this was... And poor Mel. Mel is a young worker who just started working for us. She's the person who had to open it. And so the police came and they had to fingerprint her to get her fingerprints off of that. And then the police officer joined the foundation. So he said, hey, I like your group. So, but anyway, here's another thing I got sent to me personally, because Annie Laurie, my wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor and I, we signed that open letter to Catholics to leave the church. It's time now. And so... I got this, a card from Our Lady of Lourdes, Pray for Us, after that ad ran. And this is pretty exciting. There's some prayers and poems in here, but it says, I am enrolled, a gift of healing masses. Dan Barker is hereby enrolled in the Trinity Missions Mass Society and will be included in the daily prayers of the Trinity missionaries, Friday Masses, and, I don't know if everybody gets this, but a special novena of healing Masses. And you know, my knee's feeling a lot better, I tell you. It's signed by Father Domingo, and then I think that's George and Billy who signed it. And so I said, well, what is this group? Who are these people? And on the back it tells us, the Trinity Missions. Our official name is Missionary Servants of the Most Holy Trinity. We are a Catholic organization working among the poor and abandoned across the United States. Now that sounds kind of good, working among the poor. Mexico, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, and Colombia. We work in the heart of inner city ghettos, on Native American reservations. They're still there. Even in tropical rainforests. But what do they do? The Trinity missionary priests are pastors, teachers, chaplains, and counselors. We visit the sick. It doesn't say they help them. It just says we visit the sick and the elderly. We offer guidance to youngsters. What kind of guidance do they offer to the youngsters? And we feel the pain of the poor and the homeless. So how's that? They visit them and they feel their pain, and they offer guidance to youngsters. Our work brings us in touch with people who are abandoned and alone. So anyway, I guess I should be honored that I got this card from these caring people who like to visit people and touch them. In my tribe, we're all basically Christianized, and I saw a historian of the Pueblo tribe in the southwest of the United States, where the Spanish missionaries were very strong in the American Southwest. And she said that years ago, the indigenous people were forced to pretend. We had to pretend to convert so that they wouldn't kill us. If we didn't convert, they would kill us. So they pretended to convert. And then she said something very interesting. She said, but somewhere along the line, we forgot we were pretending. We forgot. They forgot. The next generation says, oh, well, now I guess we are born into this religion, so I guess that's what we are. As Tanya said, the single greatest predictor of a person's religion is geography, what family you're from, where you happen to be born. I was born into, I thought, the perfect family, in the right religion, in the right country, in the right time of history, because Jesus was returning any minute, and he needed soldiers to be in the army to preach the good news, the gospel, the good news of salvation to the world. And I felt, how lucky can I be? Everything is perfect. I have the exactly right religion. Not just that, but the right denomination in the right religion. I have the right one. Isn't that great? How many people can say that? Well, of course, everybody says that, don't they? I started preaching when I was 15 years old. And is there any water up here? If somebody can find a bottle of water. I started preaching when I was 15. I accepted what I thought was a call to the ministry. And I believed it. I really felt it. I know there's a lot of atheists who think that we believers were just pretending, we were just faking it. Well, I was not pretending. I was not faking it. I felt it. I used to pray, and I would feel, in fact, I can still do it now. Not in front of you guys, but I can still speak in tongues. And all of a sudden, the whole brain gets this wonderful feeling. I think there's a drug thing that happens with salamat po. What is for it? Kaibigan? Kaibigan. Salamat. And this wonderful feeling of peace and this sort of ecstasy, and I felt like this kind of father figure in my brain telling me everything is good, all your problems are okay, don't worry, bahala na, this. I think bahala means God, doesn't it, in the original? Something like that. So if you say bahala na, that means, yeah, okay, well, so then do the free thinkers say that phrase? Batnala. Okay, so but do the atheists say that phrase in no? Que sera sera. Okay, bahala na. All right. But if it's a God word, well, even in Mexico we say adios, which means Dios, right? Adios. So, and in English, goodbye was from God be with ye. Goodbye, God be with you. So I guess we can borrow those words. But I accepted what I was convinced was a calling to the ministry. And I thought, Jesus is going to return any minute. The heaven is going to open. The trumpets are going to sound like a thief in the night, the Bible says. And all the people are going to either go up to heaven or down to you know where. Down to a hot place. Not Manila, but a hot place, real hot place. And I thought, I was very sincere. I got goosebumps when I prayed. I used to feel like, yes, the Spirit is so real and powerful. Who could deny it? Who could possibly deny it? By the way, I've since learned that goosebumps, you know what goosebumps? They are not evidence of the Holy Spirit. They are evidence of evolution. Did you know that? Do you know why? Because our ancestors had a lot of hair, and when it was cold, they would have thermal control. They would fluff up their fur, or when they were afraid to scare off an attacker. You've seen animals do that? So our ancestors did that, so we inherited from them the goosebumps. They're totally useless to us, but there's one proof of evolution that we have within our current evolved bodies. But I was convinced that the best thing I could do with my life, the real purpose of my life, the good news, was to try to keep people from going down there and try to get them to go up to heaven. What better calling is there? If there is an eternal life, it makes sense, doesn't it? If there really is a God, if there really is an afterlife, then it makes perfect sense. What other mission is more important, right? And I accepted this calling to preach. I started preaching when I was 15 down in Mexico, and I spent 19 years preaching. I went to a religious Bible college. I got a degree in religion, which doesn't mean a thing. I got the title Reverend, which doesn't mean a thing. It's an unearned respect. Many reverends are good people. Some priests are good people. Notice I didn't say many. There are some good people, and many of them do good things. And so I think they're good people in spite of their religion. They are good people anyway. So I started preaching. I was an associate pastor of 3 different churches in California, where I was born and raised. And then I was a cross-country evangelist, traveling from church to church, preaching with my Bible and preaching that the world's going to end, and are you ready if you meet God? In my book that I wrote called Godless, which some of you bought here, Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword to the book. And in the foreword to the book, he said, Dan Barker was not just a preacher. He was the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. And that was me. You didn't know it. You were secretly starving, you godless infidel people. You didn't know it, but you were hungry for the message that I was going to give you. And so it was your lucky day when God, it wasn't coincidence. The Bible says all things work together for good to those who love God. It wasn't coincidence. God made you sit on that seat next to me on the bus. And so how lucky can that be? How, and maybe you would think I was kind of nuts, but a lot of people, when they hear a quote unquote man of God speaking, they listen. They have respect. Oh, he's speaking about God. There's something in human nature where you think, oh, it's a pastor. It's a priest. They know something that I don't. And my life, I don't know what to do. My life doesn't have any meaning or purpose. And why am I here? And what's it all about? And so then it's so easy. Most of the time, if you want to be an evangelist, I hope you don't, but if you do, if you want to be an evangelist or a preacher, then just do it because it works. There's so many people in the world. I don't know how many people. I think there's probably some kind of a bell curve distribution of personality types. And half of the people are on this side, basically. They are susceptible. They like to believe. They want to believe. There's something in human nature where a whole lot of people, most of you in this room are on this side, right? Most of you are over here. When I talk about religious experiences, do you know what I'm talking about? Some of you never had them, right? Red, did you ever have religious experiences? Oh, you did? Okay, I could see that kind of crazy look in your eyes. But others of you went to church and you never felt anything, right? You felt like, what's everybody feeling? Well, I think, I'm not an expert, but I think there must be some kind of a distribution of our mental psychology types where some of us are naturally skeptical, but others of us are just naturally credible and gullible. So the Mormons can go all the way over to England from Utah and go up in the street and talk to people and tell them about the golden tablets and the angel Moroni and these little hat where you put your head and you look in the stones and it translates it from the ancient Hebrew into, and then the stones are buried, the tablets are buried again. And so the people in England listen to that and they say, okay, and then they go to Utah with them. How do you explain that? There must be some gullible streak in many or most of us on this planet that wants to believe that what the ministers say or the priest or the church, what they say must have some truth to it. Well, I preached. I spent all that time preaching, and I loved it. I wrote some Christian musicals as a songwriter that they're still selling today, by the way. I'm still getting royalty checks from the musicals I wrote in the 1970s, and I don't know what to think about it. I feel kind of proud. Yes, I got some money for writing, but it's this crappy stuff that I wrote, So last year I got a check from Manna Music for, it wasn't much, not like it used to be, but I got a check for $1,017, American dollars. And so I signed over the check to the Women's Medical Fund, which the Women's Medical Fund is the longest-lived abortion charity in the United States. And it is run by Ann Gaylor, my mother-in-law, since the early 1970s. It helps very, very poor women pay for abortions. Some of these women already have 4 or 5 children, and the husband's in jail, and they're about ready to be kicked out of their apartment, and they love their kids, and they can't be pregnant again. They just can't. And we don't take a position on what they should do, but when they have decided that that's what they want to do, then the Women's Medical Fund helps these women. And they're very poor. Often they call up and speak Spanish. They're from the immigrants. And so I take the calls to talk to them. And so I wrote the check over to the Women's Medical Fund, and the bookkeeper said, well, Dan, should we send the thank you letter to the Christian publisher for it? And they don't know by selling that. I did the same thing. I did a debate with Dinesh D'Souza last year at the Cleveland Right to Life conference. And I didn't want to do it. I said, I don't want to do this debate and help the Cleveland Right to Life people. You can have your own meetings and do your own things. But Dinesh said, I'll split the money. He was getting $5,000, and I never charge. I always come for free. And he said, I'll split it with you, Dan. And I said, okay. So guess what I did with that $2,500? The Women's Medical Fund got another nice check from the Cleveland Right to Life Society. But I was a Christian songwriter, as I was telling you, and that changed everything. Because then, my purpose in life, my good news to the world, was going out through music. And what happened was, I started getting invited to speak and preach at different denominations of Christianity that were not the same as my own. That made me feel uncomfortable. Because, there is not one Christianity. There is not. There are hundreds, there are thousands of Christianities, 3,000 or more. It depends how you divide them up. And each one of them can tell you they have the truth. You can open the Bible. I could do it. I could open the Bible and I could tell you, look, let me open the Bible and let me tell you why my denomination is right. Read it with an open heart and an open mind and read it the way I read it, and then you'll see that we have the true faith. Well, they can all do that, and they fight with each other. They've killed each other. In Europe, the 30 Years' War was based to a large degree on the confessional differences between Catholics and Protestants. And even Protestants were fighting among themselves about these different issues, and they were killing each other, and whether babies should be baptized or whether the host actually turns into the real body of Jesus, the transubstantiation. So what happens if you have to vomit? Does Jesus come? I mean, what? I don't get it. Listening to some of those sermons, Did you know the word reverend was a typo? It was a mistake. Did you know that? The first letter was originally an N.
Get it.
They preach and they preach and they preach and they never. So, you finally got it. Tomorrow, somebody's going to wake up and go, "Oh, I get it." Tomorrow, they laugh tomorrow. So I started meeting all these different kinds of Christians, and they're all different. And I realized there's probably as many Christianities as there are Christians. Each one has their own. And even within Catholicism, no two Catholics think the same. There's only a few. I debated Cardinal Pell of Sydney a couple years ago, and I found out that he's a real Vatican-type Australian cardinal, Archbishop of Sydney, and yet most Australians don't agree. Most Australian Catholics don't agree with Cardinal Pell. Isn't that right, Tanya? Most Australian, about 10% of the Catholics in Australia actually agree with him. They're all smart enough to think for themselves. They all don't have 12 children. They're thinking. They're using their minds. He and I got into a fun debate. It was on ABC Radio. And I think what bothered him the most was not so much anything that was said, but it was the fact that he called me Dan, and I just called him George. Everybody was calling him His Eminence, the Most Holy. And I just called him George. That's his name, right? His name is George. And so, and then he didn't like it when I criticized Mother Teresa. And in fact, he thought, how dare you criticize Mother Teresa? How dare you not? How dare you not criticize? How dare you not use your brain, So even among Catholicism, there's no agreement. Among Protestants, there's no agreement. And isn't that interesting? The Bible says, Paul said in the Bible, God is not the author of confusion, right? But can you think of a single book that's caused more confusion than the Bible? Look at the confusion. They all think they have it. I thought I had it. So I started meeting different Christians. And what happened in my life was the good news, which was heaven and hell, I was preaching about heaven and hell and the afterlife and death and all that. And the flames of hell, and do you want to avoid that? And as I started meeting other Christians, I realized there's a broad cross-section of theology that's not all the same. And I started to migrate across that continuum. That's what happened to me. After years of meeting pastors who were good people, really good people, and I also preached in a couple of Catholic churches that had performed my musicals, which I thought was interesting. They were the charismatic Catholics. And my message started to change, and I moved less afterlife and hellfire, and I started preaching more about this life. The good news is how we can have morals. And I started getting older. My kids started to grow up. I got into my 30s then and realized maybe Jesus is not coming tonight. He said, I remember back in the 1970s, Hal Lindsey told us, the second coming of Jesus can't be any later than the mid-1980s. And I thought, wow, that late? So Jesus never did come again. Paul wrote in the Bible that it would be soon. Jesus, even in Revelation, even so, Lord, come quickly. But I don't know about you. But I don't think 2,000 years is soon. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong in my calculations here. But they were waiting. Every generation of Christians has thought, or has had a group that's thought they were living in the end times. The Millerites, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Campbell group that was just this last year, the end of the world. Maybe one of these days, somebody's going to be right. But I realized that, maybe there's something wrong with my theology, my thinking. Maybe I'm not the person who's going to end all these theological controversies. I'm the guy, after thousands of years, I'm going to be the guy that has the truth. Instead of becoming this arrogant atheist, I became this humble atheist. I went through this process where I became less arrogant and more humble. And eventually, of course, I didn't just jump from one point to atheism overnight. You can't do that. You don't just wake up one morning as a fundamentalist Christian and go, oh, silly me, there's no God. Oh, how could I have been so stupid? It wasn't like that. It was a gradual, step-by-step. Are Adam and Eve historical or aren't they? Are the evidences for prayer real or aren't they? Are the evidences for God real or aren't they? The basic question that should be asked of any religion, the basic question is it true? That's the question that should be asked. We can then ask, is it useful? Maybe there's an argument that it might be useful for some people on this end of the bell curve who need a crutch in their lives. I don't know about that. Maybe it's useful for some. I guess if an alcoholic, the only way an alcoholic can be sober is by believing in a higher power, well, then we would rather have them sober than not, wouldn't we? And maybe in a few cases, my brother Darrell is an alcoholic, and he solved it without religion, with rational recovery. So you can do it with religion or without, if you need some kind of a crutch. But so is it true? And I realized after the end of a 4 or 5 year process of gradually migrating that what I was preaching and what I believed actually is not true. The Bible is not a reliable guide. The Bible is contradictory. It is unhistorical. It is unscientific. It is actually uninspiring. Jesus did say a couple of good things. I don't think Jesus was a good moral teacher. I don't think he was a good example. He did say a few good things, and like Thomas Jefferson did, he took a pair of scissors to the Bible. He cut out all the crap. You can actually see it. You can see the Jefferson Bible there in the American Museum of American History in D.C. He cut all the stuff out of the Bible that he thought was crap. And if you think that's too strong of a word, the word that he used was dunghill. He wrote a letter to Adams, his friend Adams, and he said, I was looking for the good teachings of Jesus. And he cut out all the stuff, and he said it was like looking for a diamond in a dunghill. But he did find some good teachings, and there are some good teachings of Jesus, but on balance, it's no better than anything you and I would have come up with. He was not some great stellar thinker. Why didn't he say some useful stuff to us? Like, for example, wash your hands. when you eat, you know? Why didn't he tell us something about the germ theory of disease? I mean, why do we have to wait 2,000 years and needless deaths for just a simple little bit of hygiene, you know? You would think the God of the universe, who cares about the human race, would have said something about equal rights for women, maybe? Or something about the poor. When one of his disciples complained, rightfully, that this precious ointment was being wasted to wash the feet of Jesus, shouldn't that be sold to feed the poor? They'd say, you can read that in the New Testament. Jesus said, it's okay. You will always have the poor with you, but I'm not going to be here much longer, so go ahead and waste it on me. He said a couple of things about the poor, but he never did anything or never instituted any real policies for helping to alleviate hunger. Slavery, did he ever say anything against slavery? Nothing. In fact, Jesus said very clearly, he showed us how compassionate he was by saying, and this is kind of compassionate, you have to give him this, there are some slaves that you should not beat as hard as others. Think about it, because they didn't know better. You don't beat them all the same. Some of them really deserve it, but others, go easy on them, okay? So that's the compassion of Jesus. He never said anything. He incorporated slavery into his parables like it was the most natural thing, and of course it was to the people who wrote the book back then. Have you ever seen the book Purpose Driven Life by Rick Warren? You have it? Do you love it? My brother sent my dad a copy of it, and Dad read a couple. My dad's an atheist, by the way. After I left the ministry, my mom and dad both became atheists, too, which is really a nice story. But one brother, Tom, Daryl and I both became atheists, but our brother Tom is still a born-again Christian. He's a great guy. He's really a good man. He was a high school principal. We call him the white sheep of the family. He's scratching his head going, what happened to my Christian family? But he sent a copy of The Purpose-Driven Life to my dad. And Dad read a couple chapters, and then he thanked Tom, and he said, all right, right. So the purpose-driven life, you know, the good news. I read my book, The Good Atheist. I talk a little bit about Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. In fact, I wanted to call my next book Life-Driven Purpose, which I think is a great title. But the publisher got scared that Rick Warren would sue them. And I said, there's no way they can sue over a title, but they were still scared. In fact, if you look on the back of the book, there's a disclaimer. This book has nothing to do with Rick Warren and blah, blah. That would have been a great title. Instead, they called it The Good Atheist, which is okay. It's not the good atheist as in moral good, but in practical good. It's not in the, Danny, you're a good boy, but it's more like, Danny, you did a good job. The good atheist, the people in this world who are atheists, who have done good things, are numerous, many, 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 and I list more than 300 examples of people who have changed the world for the better as atheists, as non-believers, in science, in the arts, in music, in humanity, and all of that. So don't bother reading Rick Warren's book. Let me tell you what it's about in a couple of sentences. There's all this crappy stuff, right? But then the basic thing, the purpose of life, you know what it is according to Rick Warren? The purpose of life is to believe in God and know God, to go to church, and to get other people to come to church with you. That's it. This whole book, The Purpose-Driven Life, which has sold many millions of copies, that's it. There's nothing new. There's nothing basic. There's nothing in it that we haven't heard over and over. Just believe in God and go to church and get other people to come with you, and that's it. That's the purpose-driven life. Well, I think there's some better news. The really, really good news is not that what I used to preach before, that you're all going to hell. That's not the good news. Or that you have to submit like slaves before a master. The truly good news is not that there is a purpose of life. The truly good news is that there is no purpose of life. That's great news. We should not want there to be a purpose of life. Of course, life by definition is survival and reproduction, but that's not a purpose. That's just a definition of what life is. Life is its own reward. We've got it. We have it. It's here. We don't have to look around. We don't have to look for some reverend or some bishop to tell us what our purpose, or some holy book. We have our lives right now. According to the Bible, according to Paul, according to Rick Warren, the purpose of life is to become a slave. It is to submit. If there's a purpose of life, that means we are secondary. We are servants in some higher plan, right? We are all less than what we could really be as human beings. the Bible is pro-slavery, as I said before, and Paul proudly called himself a slave of Christ. The word was doulos. Some translations try to soften it by saying servant. I am a servant of Christ. But that Greek word there is doulos, which means slave. He was a slave of Christ. And slavery and submission to the high authority, to the slave master, is the purpose of life within the Christian religion. Have you ever noticed the postures of prayer? What are they? You kneel down, you prostrate yourself, you put your head down, and what is this? Your hands are shackled together before the slave master, right? Like that, and you're showing, I am no threat to you. You are great. You are everything, and I am nothing. Prayer is this self-abnegation, this denial of ourselves, that the master is wonderful. The purpose of life in the Bible is to glorify the master. The master is great. We're going to live forever with this great master, and we are just this humble, nothing servants. What a put-down of humanity. What a horrible insult. Every time I see a nativity scene, people say, oh, the little baby Jesus. That's a horrible put-down of the human species, that we all needed to bow down before this master, this baby who grew up to be a master, because we are horrible sinners. We are no good. We are rotten, and if you die, you're going to go to hell. And maybe that's true for a few people on this end of the bell curve. Maybe there are some sociopaths, psychopaths who really are dangerous that need something, maybe just to be locked up. But for most of us who are in this room, who are mentally healthy, we're not like that at all. And yet the nativity scene, the Christian message, puts us all down. You're bad. Don't you feel horrible? You can't sell salvation to someone until you first sell damnation. You can't sell a vacuum to someone who doesn't have a floor to clean, right? You've got to create a need. And if you can create this need, you're bad. And you tell little children, oh, your thoughts are evil. Do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell? You should say confession about this. Well, then that becomes a self-perpetuating self-image in the brain where you think, I need the master to tell me. I need my daddy figure to tell me what to think and how to be. So the good news of Christianity is slavery. Did you know that those slave ships that went back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean, bringing captured Africans, I don't want to say slaves because they weren't slaves en route yet. Most of those slave ships, they had netting around the outside. Do you know why? Do you know why they had netting? Because a lot of those captured Africans who were not slaves yet, who had not submitted yet, they would knowingly dive over the boat, knowing that there were sharks following that boat, rather than becoming a submitting slave to some other person's will. Can you imagine that? What would you be like if you were one of those people? Would you want to submit or would you want to be a free person? Would you want to be... Is there anything more exciting in the world than a slave revolt? My country, the United States of America, we are a proudly rebellious people, at least historically. We fought a revolutionary war. We kicked out the king, the sovereign, the master, the slave owner, we kicked him out, and instead of having a country under the authority of a master, of a sovereign who's over us, we did it like this. We turned it upside down, and we said, the very first words of our Constitution are, we the people. The people themselves. There's no religious authority, there's no monarchy, there's no lord, no master, and yet how many people in my country still want to bow down before a master and a slave? How many people in this country want to bow down before the Legaspes and the friars in the church and the so-called authorities who are telling them you are nothing and you need to submit, right? Nobody in this room, I'm sure. So if there is no purpose of life, people often ask, well, then why live? Because Christianity gives purpose, right? Well, no, thanks, but no thanks. If purpose is to be a slave, then no thanks. But listen to this. To say that there's no purpose of life does not mean there's no purpose in life. We can have lives of immense purpose, not from outside, bestowed upon us, where we get our marching orders from some commander who tells us what to do. We get purpose from within us by solving problems. Find a problem to solve. Whatever it is. Maybe your sister dies of some rare disease. So you dedicate your life to fighting that disease, right? Maybe it's poverty. Maybe it's inequality. Maybe it's oppression. Maybe it's disease. Maybe it's knowledge to gain. Maybe it's science. Maybe it's art to create. Find some problem that you can solve. Then your life will have immense purpose. Not a purpose of life, but purpose in life. I think it's amazing that atheism is growing in the world, and this is an example. I didn't want to miss this for anything. The Philippines' first National Atheism Conference. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, we started off with 3 people on a dining room table. It was Ann Gaylor, her daughter Annie Laurie, whom I later married. In fact, she and I met on Oprah Winfrey Show back in the late 80s, and we have a videotape of that day we met, which is kind of neat. And another man, he's since died. The 3 of them worked as volunteers for many, many, many years, complaining about violations of separation of church and state. The truly good news is that we can have a world of peace if the government stays secular. If the government is neutral, if the government backs off and folds its arms and says, you people believe what you want, you can disagree with each other, the government's not going to establish what the correct views are on religion, then we have hope when that happens. So the Freedom from Religion Foundation today has more than 18,000 members, which is the largest explicit organization of atheists and agnostics. I think 90% of our group call themselves atheists. We have a national newspaper. We have a weekly radio show, which some of you listen to by podcast. You're welcome to go to Free Thought Radio and listen. We'll talk about this conference, so sign up and hear what we say about you. By then, maybe I'll have my soul back from all these photographs. Student groups starting all over the world. The Reason Rally in Washington, D.C. had at least 15,000, some say maybe 20 or 30,000 people that were there. The General Atheism Conference in Melbourne last week, was it 4,000 people that were there? Can you imagine being in a room with 4,000 atheists? It's really, if I can borrow a word, very inspiring. And the Atheist Alliance International and the humanist groups are all reporting immense growth. Something's happening, and you get to be a part of it. Some kind of a corner is being turned in the world. And this conference will be a part of that. Someday you'll be able to look back and say, yeah, we were there when we started to see that. When this younger crop of non-believers starts voting, starts exercising, starts doing things, I'm going to end with a challenge. Now, I know that atheists don't have bishops. We don't have deacons. We don't have religious authorities to tell you what you must do. In fact, atheism is a weird kind of a movement. Atheism is a movement with no followers. Have you thought of that? We're all leaders. There's no higher ups. There's no somebody else. You know, we have people we admire and respect, like Carl Sagan, like Dawkins, like Dennett, like Hitchens. Life goes on without a hitch, though. There was a wonderful testimony to Hitchens at the GAC in Melbourne last week. The work that he lived, and that's the kind of afterlife he would have wanted, not living on in a soul, but his words, his deeds, the effects of what his life did would live on. So I will issue you a challenge, not as a leader to a bunch of sheep, because there's no sheep here, but just as someone with experience in the United States, with a group that has made a difference. We just hired our 4th full-time attorney. We are writing letters. We are taking lawsuits. And the challenge is this. When you go home from this conference, do something different. Doesn't matter what it is. Don't just come back and say, we had a nice conference. It wasn't that fun. We got to be along with other people. Do something. You decide what it is. Maybe it's writing a letter. Maybe it's complaining to a government official or to a mayor or to a high school principal or a teacher. Maybe it's just talking to someone. Do something different in your life in some way that, as Norm said, intends to end up with a world that has less harm in it, less violence, more understanding. Do something different. Carl Sagan was giving a speech at a university once, and after the speech, a student came up to ask a question, and the student said, but Dr. Sagan, if what you say is true, then what is the meaning of life? And Carl Sagan looked at the young man and said, do something meaningful. Thank you all.